I'm Pete Peterson, again, the very grateful dean of the Graduate Policy School here at Pepperdine. And again, just so delighted to be partnering with the Manhattan Institute on these important series of conversations. Really appreciated Professor Glazer's setting the foundation for these conversations, and then followed by a great panel of mayors. And we are now going to enter into the afternoon part of the agenda with two lecture conversations, the first of which begins with my friend, the mayor, the 60th mayor for the city of Dallas, Eric Johnson. Eric was elected to the mayoralty in June of 2019. Prior to becoming mayor, Eric served as a member of the Texas House of Representatives for 9 years, from April 2010 to June of 2019. He is a native of West Dallas, a graduate of Harvard, Princeton, and Penn, which I understand are very good schools back east.
All right.
Previously a practicing lawyer, he is married to his wife, Nikki, and 3 kids. And if you don't follow him on Twitter, you really should. It is not only a great way of learning about Eric, but also learning about your great city, which we've heard referenced in Professor Glazer's remarks, and we'll get into a little bit more here. But please join me in welcoming Mayor Johnson. Mayor, I thought where we'd start is just a little bit of your background. I like the way one of the last panel began with, why did you run for mayor? Obviously, you had served at the state level for 9 years. What was the decision to move from the state level into running for mayor of your hometown?
I hope you don't mind if I just say first how grateful I am to have been invited. So thanks to the Manhattan Institute, and thanks to Pepperdine and the School of Public Policy. You're doing a great job as the dean of the school, so thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I mean, I get asked that question obviously a lot. Anyone who's ever run for office and held office has answered that question a bunch. I'll try to be real quick about it, because I think there's so much with a room like this to talk about the challenges we're all facing trying to run these cities and trying to be competitive. But I guess if I had to sum up the reason, it's because federal government getting essentially nothing done, state government getting slightly more done, local government getting the most done. And if you're attracted to these types of, if you're attracted to this vocation, this of public service, then you're probably as jazzed as I am about the idea of actually solving problems. And you gravitate towards the roles you can play where you actually can see the results of what you're working on. I couldn't imagine, honestly, being in Congress and working on something or claiming to care about something for 25 years and never seeing one bit of progress. I can't even wrap my head around that. State government is better, but local government is best if what you want to do is think of something one morning while you're driving into work, or if you're mayor, maybe you have a detail that drives you around, so you're thinking about this in your car. And then you run it past a few folks that you trust, and you get sort of that first check that you run to make sure, am I crazy? Am I missing something very obvious? And once it passes that threshold, it's up to you as to how talented and skilled of a leader you are to translating that idea that you just had in the car into actual policy that's affecting millions of people in a matter, in some cases, of weeks. It's weeks, it's months, it's stuff you can measure, it's stuff you can talk about one day and be cutting the ribbon on within a year, or launching an initiative that where people's lives are being affected with a very short period of time. That was very attractive. The person who preceded me in the office had termed out. It was a big old field of folks running, none of whom had really the kind of experience I thought that I was going to be able to bring to the table. So I won't tell the lie that a lot of politicians tell and say, there's a draft Eric Johnson movement. I decided that I wanted to put the work that I was putting into being a state legislator into being the mayor of my hometown. So I was the 9th filer of 9, ran while I was in the legislature serving in our session, And obviously it turned out okay. I won, and I've been in the job about 3 years now. So that's the answer. That's the story.
One of the things you touched on, and we heard in this morning's conversations, was this importance of local government, and especially those serving in local government, that there's a real sense of place, right? Certainly when we think about even statewide offices, if not federal and national offices, there can be a slight disconnection from the place where you grew up, right? And I just wonder, as you thought about running for office, obviously you were representing that district or that region in the state, but to serve in an executive capacity in an area region in which you grew up, what was that like, and how does that affect your perspective, how you see the city in which you grew up? How does it impact the way that you view public policy and your own leadership?
That question actually is going to allow me to talk about two things. I actually made a note when Professor Glazer was talking. Professor Glazer, thank you so much for your presentation this morning. I actually wanted a format like this so that I didn't feel like I was wedded to some remarks I'd prepared back in Dallas to just say to you guys. I wanted to be able to respond in real time to whatever Professor Glazer said this morning. So your question about that sense of place, and you referred to me as an executive, allows me to speak to two things that I think are really not well understood about state and local government, and that I think we need to do something about, because it makes a difference. I'll tell you what those two things are. So I made a note of this. First of all, I don't think people understand how widely variant city governments really are in terms of how they're set up. I think everyone just assumes they know what a mayor is, but you really have, you handing someone a business card that says mayor on it, you have no idea what that person's actual responsibilities are. You'd have to really dig into their charter and into the state laws and find out whether or not, I guess the biggest, split is the council manager forms of government versus the mayor council forms of government. I'm in a council manager form of government. So I'm not even in the bucket of mayors that people, if they're being really technical about this, and the technical stuff actually matters, and I'll get into that in a minute.
Yep.
I'm not even really in the executive bucket, right? At best, I'm an executive chairman. For folks who are from the business world, you understand that concept. But truly, I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the Corporation of Dallas. Dallas is a corporation. Its residents are its shareholders. We've got a board of directors, which are my elected council members, and I'm the chairman of that board. And that's really how the city is set up to run. And how successful you are at mayor, I think, depends on how well you wield the power of that chairmanship and how closely you can make it resemble an executive chairmanship. But make no mistake, you are not the CEO. The CEO is the city manager. And that carries with it its own, we could talk about that a long time.
Right. Yep.
But I won't go into that today. But on the other side of the ledger, you got these mayor council forms of government, and really there's where it gets real interesting between, who is truly strong, what's the strongest of the strong versus medium versus weak. And so it's fascinating to see the mayors in this room and talk to different mayors about what they are able to do. As far as the connection to place, to bring this together, another point that I wanted to address from Professor Glazer's talk this morning, he produced this great list, and I was looking at the list, and it reminded me of something that I deal with every day, it seems, as mayor of Dallas, which is the media and academics love to talk about metros. They love metros. They love talking about metro areas. Mayors don't think about metros. We don't live in the world of metros. We live in the world of a city limits, an incorporated town.
Yeah.
And we have zero jurisdiction outside of those lines. We derive zero tax revenue outside of those lines. We have zero public safety powers and control outside of those lines. And so what is lost when we leave the discussion at the level of a metro. I am not the mayor of the DFW Metro. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
I'm the mayor of the Dallas part of the, when you look at that line, it says Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington Metro.
Yeah.
And we are in a competition within that metro for all the things that Professor Glazer was talking about this morning. And in a lot of ways, that competition is more cutthroat than the one we're in with all of you California mayors as a Texas mayor. Like, people talk about all the businesses we're trying to lure from California. We've had a fair amount of success doing that. We have. I mean, but when I say we've had a fair amount of success doing it, when you start to look below the surface, you see, well, is Dallas really attracting those companies, or is it Frisco, Plano, McKinney,
Right.
Westlake, Southlake, our suburbs? Those little towns when I was growing up were nothing. They were just basically bedroom communities. A lot of it was farmland. Now they are legitimate economic competitors of ours, and we are having to compete with them along all the bases that Professor Glazer talked about, and with varying degrees of success. And that is a real misunderstanding that I think people, we need to dig in a little more on that, because that is really where I'm being graded. That's really how I've chosen to really focus my energy. I want to make sure that we are getting our fair share of the economic activity, the housing starts, the jobs, the corporate relocations, the tax base, because it really does matter where those assets are located.
Well, you've taken away what my next question was
no.
going to be. No, that's good. That's all good, because I think that is, I think, a very interesting part of the conversation as we talk about cities. We do evaluate, and many times in public policy research, regions, and obviously Dallas-Fort Worth, DFW, is seen as such an expansive and growing region. But for someone who's leading a city, you're to be clear about where your interests are, and I think and the fact that there's competition within that region, I think is also an important thing to consider. Now, related to that, and again, back to this difference in moving from.
But before you
Yeah.
go ahead, I'll tell you, and it's pretty fierce. I mean, the competition is pretty fierce. And I'll tell you, it's interesting because for folks who aren't from one of the metros you're talking about, if you're from outside of a metro, the cities around Dallas are marketing to these California firms, basically come to Dallas. They're using the attraction of Dallas and the allure of Dallas, and then they're really they're sort of convincing folks to think of their communities as like a neighborhood of Dallas. You're choosing the Plano neighborhood or McKinney?
Right.
They're not neighborhoods of Dallas. Right. They're wholly separate municipalities, and it has an impact on our ability to deliver services within our city limits. It has an impact on the schools. It has an impact on everything. It's a real issue, but at the core of it is really marketing their cities, sort of drafting off of Dallas's allure, the Cowboys and everything else, but the Cowboys aren't even in Dallas, which we'll talk about maybe another time. But go ahead.
That is a whole other.
That's a whole other deal.
I don't know if folks have followed that, but if you followed his Twitter feed, you would know.
But it is fierce competition.
Well, and I want to get into that for a second, right? Because on two dimensions. One is moving from a state representative, which is essentially best case intentions, is a deliberative, collaborative body. Certainly you have Democrats and Republicans, but you don't have as much regional competition among representatives, to an executive, albeit chairperson of a city, where you really move into intense competition, as you're describing there, at the same time looking to engage companies and other opportunities for economic development outside of the region. And in that, I don't think most people think that all the competition is happening in the private sector. No. But there really is a place for competition and a competitive spirit in the public sector as well. And so first, did you know there was going to be this level of competition? I take you to be someone who's not afraid of competition. You seek it, you like it. But how does that energize you, feed into how you lead, the fact that you're not just leading Dallas, it's Dallas against the FW and the Irvings and the Planos and the rest of them.
Not only did I know that there was going to be this competition, but I knew that to embrace this mentality was going to be a repudiation of the administrations before me from the past 20 years or so. There had been an increased effort over 20 or so years to shift the focus to a more regional focus because the region is growing so fast. We actually changed our Chamber of Commerce in Dallas from the Dallas Chamber of Commerce to the Dallas Regional Chamber. It became all about talking about the airports, which we have these amazing airports. I mean, DFW is the second busiest airport in the world. Love Field's a great airport as well. We've got the two of the three largest airlines in the world are headquartered in Dallas and Fort Worth. American's in Fort Worth, Southwest is in Dallas. So there became to be this big regional focus, and the business community loved it because the business community doesn't have taxing issues. They're trying to sell products and services to customers. So AT&T, which is headquartered in Dallas, is not really concerned with whether or not you were on the Richardson city limits side of the street or the Dallas side of the street when they're selling you broadband or a cell phone or anything else. But it makes a big difference to the mayor of Dallas, to what side of the street someone is on. So I knew that I was actually potentially, and to a certain degree did, put myself at odds with the previous administration's focus and what the business community was talking about. It was kind of a kumbaya regional thing that was just starting to really take root in Dallas, and it has taken root. And I've said, and I think I've done a pretty good job of explaining to people, because my background is actually in public finance. I'm a public finance attorney. I understand the concept of taxes, and I understand where the revenue comes from to run city government. And I was trying to explain to people at first with a little bit of, I think, confusion, and I think people really get it. At the end of the day, if you've chosen to be in Dallas, but you aren't a Dallas first person when it comes to tax base and creating assets within your city limits, then you are your own reason why your tax rate continues to go up every year. Because it's just a two variable equation. It's base times rate. And if the base is dwindling and we still have to provide the same basic infrastructure to people regardless, then rate is going up. Like, you're taxing yourself out of your own city if you don't attract people to within the city limits. And they're like, oh, I see, And so that's really, it's been a real change, but it required having to kind of stand up and raise the flag and say, we got to do something different here.
I want to go into focus a little bit more on Dallas itself and just the incredible growth that you've been experiencing. I just say as a sidebar, a lot of people may not know that on the California state flag, the red star in the upper left-hand corner is actually the Lone Star of Texas. And it's because we both came into the Union precipitated by the Mexican-American War. And whenever I speak with business audiences, it feels like the California bear is walking towards the Lone Star of Texas. And that is happening over and over again. And so maybe just as a first just question on this, you represented the region from 2010, obviously, 2019, obviously moved into mayor. Just describe a little bit, as someone who grew up in the area, how much Dallas itself, and then maybe the region, although certainly, as you rightly argued, not as important to the work that you're doing, but what's it like to grow up in a region, since we don't have many of those in California right now, that's exploding?
Okay, so definitely don't want to create the impression that what happened to the region isn't important. It is important, but it can't be at the expense of your core. So here's the situation we find ourselves in. Dallas is the 9th largest city in the U.S. It's sandwiched between San Diego, Mayor Faulkner, and San Jose. And that 8, 9, 10 slot has been that way since I was in high school. I mean, that really hasn't changed in a long time. Like, none of us can kind of, San Jose can't quite catch us. We can't quite catch San Diego. Now, the metro that professors love to talk about is the 4th largest metro in the country behind the New York Metro, the LA Metro, and the Chicago Metro, and we are the fastest growing of those, predicted to pass the Chicago Metro within the next 10 to 20 years, however long it takes, depends on who's doing the estimating. So the Metro is growing like crazy. The city is also growing, but not at the same rate as the smaller cities in the Metro. So of the top 10 cities in the US over the past 10 years, we got the census back, only 2 cities actually outgrew Dallas in terms of the rate of growth over that period. And it was Phoenix and San Antonio, I believe. So Dallas is growing fast, but not as fast as the Planos, McKinneys, Friscos, our northern suburbs and our western suburbs. So what it feels like on the ground is it's a lot of influx of folks from the coast who are bringing they're bringing some of their politics with them, which is causing some people great joy and some people a little consternation, as you would imagine. They're bringing their perspective on the housing market from where they came from, which is causing upward pressure on our housing market because they see a 2,500, 3,000 square foot house, and they're like, that's a $2 million house. And Texans are looking around going, well, that was a $750,000 house, we thought. But yeah, sure, $2 million. Yes, you were correct, California. And so it's putting pressure on our housing market because people are willing to pay more for the housing. And so it's, the things that you talked about, Professor Glazer, this morning about, if a smart city is going to look at, their crime, they're going to look at their housing supply, and they're going to look at, quality of life issues, education, stuff like that. Well, I can take education off of my ledger because I'm legally not allowed to really meddle with it. We have independent school districts with superintendents and their own boards of directors. Right. We care a lot about that. It's important to us, but that's over there. The crime issue, would love to talk about at length at some point, maybe today. But that housing issue, that's right in the mayor's wheelhouse. That's right in the city's wheelhouse. And we see we're hearing and seeing a lot more talk about the need to generate more housing, particularly more affordable housing. So when you talk about, we need to permit more, one of the things I thought about, and I said I wanted to sort of have that conversation with you about was, permit what, though? That's the question. We have a broken permitting system, in my opinion, in that we don't permit fast enough, and we've made it too hard to permit anything. I mean, even like, a pool renovation or a bathroom renovation or a pool.
Granny flat or something.
Those things are not going fast enough. But the question really that we're dealing with, even more than how to do permitting better and faster, is what are we trying to build? Are we trying to build more affordable housing? What does that mean? Like, what is affordable housing? Workforce housing, affordable housing, mixed use versus single family, that's always a hot debate. And we're even in the weeds now on how to regulate STR, short-term rentals, and what that's doing to the housing market. So we're still trying to really wrestle at the local level with, how to generate more housing and what kind. But it is definitely, I think, I would agree, it's in the top 2 or 3 issues that we need to contend with at the city. But so the growth is really putting pressure on the housing market. It's putting pressure on the infrastructure, which was already aging and needs more investment. And it highlights some of the disparities at a city like Dallas, which is maybe I don't know, maybe different than West Coast cities in that we have this history of Jim Crow and segregation and, the legacy of that is forget, critical race theory and talking about, but we can see it in the infrastructure. Like, we can see where they chose to build sidewalks or not. We can see it in terms of, which areas after a heavy rain flood and which ones don't. We can see it in which ones have, believe it or not, paved alleys that look like a nice small street really versus just a dirt alley, and what a coincidence. It's always in the same areas where you see all of those infrastructure lacks. It's always in the areas that are predominantly African-American and now increasingly Latino. And so the growth is starting to stress all of these things. But it's a challenge that we have to deal with head on at city government. We can't duck it. We can't punt it for 25 years like they do in Washington. So we're tackling it head on, and I'm happy to talk sometime about what we're doing.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second and pull apart a couple individual policy issues. But one other theme I think that we're drawing from the morning, I'm sure is going to play out in the afternoon, is how COVID has changed the game as it relates to local government leadership. Not only the policies that have gotten put on your plate, but also how the public views local government. As I mentioned just in my introductory remarks, I think we're seeing an awakening in some ways, which has some positive and negative aspects to it as far as people becoming newly aware of the policy-making levers at the local level. I think you've been mayor only during COVID.
Essentially, I had some months there before.
Yeah, so not probably the best way to ask a comparison question, but what has it been like first in your campaign? And we were talking before just about what Mayor Falconer said about curveballs. I mean, this is the greatest curveball of all time. Talk about what it's been like to lead a major city during the COVID era.
Gosh, we were just talking about this, Professor, weren't we? About this pandemic has brought leaders of all types of organizations of any size and any real significance in this country to their knees. I mean, I'm sure you've all read the articles. Half of you in here are mayors yourselves. The rate of pre-announced early retirements for mayors and not seeking re-election and things like that, highest we've ever seen. I mean, mayors throwing in the towel left and right. In Texas, we're setting some record right now for superintendents who are very well, maybe it's that way in California too, but in Texas, that's one of your higher paying public sector jobs along with city manager. I mean, these major school district superintendents are pulling in $500,000, $750,000, running these large urban school districts. They're throwing in the towel left and right. I mean, like just a rush of Texas major school district superintendents throwing in the towel. Harvard president announced yesterday, throwing in the towel. This is pandemic related, folks. Like there's no question. This is about just the daily decision making and the pressure that, and all sort of the non-even health, not directly even about delivery. This is not just about like sort of getting vaccines into arms and things like that. It was about that for a while, and that's sort of how it started for me.
Right.
Again, this goes back to the whole, you can't have a really intelligent conversation about city government, local government, without understanding the systems, because it varies so widely across the country what mayors had responsibility for. So within Texas, majority of public health is handled by counties. Mayors have almost no public health responsibility, except for in counties where they retained their own health departments. There's very few of those, but there are some. Dallas is not one of them. We have a contract with Dallas County that handles public health. Now, that's the fact. Residents do not care about the facts when they are being faced with a deadly virus that no one even understands. Think about this. There was a time when we couldn't even figure out how it was transmitted. It's like, is it through droplets? Is it airborne? Is it can you if you sit in a seat with someone who had it?
Right.
Can you get we didn't even understand how it was transmitted, and we had no vaccine.
Yeah.
And so good luck telling people, hey, this is the county health department's area. Like, I had to be out there reassuring people that we were going to get through this and asking them to give up varying degrees of their liberties and freedoms. And at some point, asking became directing. And we had to sort of tell people, we got to do social distancing on our trails. We got to do social distancing in these buildings. We got to do these various things because we didn't know.
Yeah.
It was hard, and although we're not really in that phase anymore, the impact that it's had on the workplace, and I think it's caused people to question just how important the work they're doing is to them. Like, do I even want to be doing this? Is this who I am? Like, people are having existential crises about who they are. Families are splitting up. What it did to our domestic violence numbers what it did to the various, obviously what it's done to the entire country in terms of violent crime. We don't really understand it yet. Folks, hopefully at schools like Pepperdine and Harvard and whatnot will eventually figure out exactly what it was about this disease that made violent crime explode. But there's a reason why there was a national violent crime wave that coincided perfectly with this disease. But we all had to deal with the fallout of that, and how we continue to have trials in court and jail people while there's a deadly disease going on and vaccines aren't mandated. So, how you deal with, like where do your rights, end and mine begin when it comes to not wanting to be in a jail cell with you?
Right.
Like it just got really hard. And I think a lot of people said, I'm good, man. I've given my 4 years or whatever, and now I'm ready to go and get one of these virtual tech jobs or whatever you guys have out here. So, I mean, it's been hard. It's been very hard. So, but
Well, talk a bit about, and just as a quick note, we will be going to questions here. So if you have, you should have the question cards there, and I know Melissa and others will go around and collect the cards. So if you have questions for Mayor Johnson, please write those and we'll get to them. Let's look at a couple of those issues then, because during that time, I remember following you very closely, as I always do on social media, that the crime issue, and as Mayor Faulconer mentioned before, having protesters outside his house pushing for the defund the police, whatever that meant in reality. Obviously, that was the catchphrase that was being used. Talk a little bit about what that was like to navigate that time, given some of the historical pieces to it, but also the reality that many of the policy requests, to the degree they were thought out, could be seen as actually making crime worse in Dallas.
Oh gosh, man, easily the most frustrated I'd ever been as mayor, the most challenged I'd ever been, and probably the most trying for my family for the similar reasons Mayor Faulconer had. We had protesters at our house too. So I'm African American. You can see that, right? Okay, I'm African American. I'm a former, almost decade-long Democrat state legislator who becomes mayor of Dallas, and then George Floyd gets killed in Minnesota. Now, mind you, in Dallas, we have not had in recent history a major problem with police violence that, on the par with anything that happened like, in Minnesota, but we've not been perfect.
Right.
So we've been working for a long time trying to address the issues we have had. So we had our own local history that we have been working on, and we were kind of in a good place. We had created a police oversight board, which is going well, but this happened, and basically it sort of became a moment for every activist who cared about this issue. And I understand the strategic thinking. Yeah. We're going to hook into this movement to try to advance the ball here locally. I'm actually fine with that as a strategic matter. I am. But here's where it got touchy. I was not going to support anything that I believed was going to make Dallas less safe in the face of numbers I was getting every day about what's happening with crime in Dallas and across the country. And I made it very, 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 very clear. We're going to continue on our path of reform. We're going to continue to have those conversations. We're going to continue to take those actions. We're going to continue to do all the things we've been doing here. But we're not going to let a situation that happens someplace else cause us to do things like, these were the proposals. These were people who came to city council, registered to speak, had legitimate organizations behind them, on record telling the Dallas City Council, if you don't cut the police department budget by 60%, you're out of a job. We're going to make sure all of you get fired. You're not going to be mayor anymore. You're not going to be a council person anymore. Serious proposal to whack the police budget by 60%. Now, 90% of those folks would also then say in their next sentence, and we want you to put that money into education. And you want to raise your hand and say, you don't have no idea about, I guess, the whole entity called the Dallas Independent School District over there that does education, because we don't have schools to put that money. Like, if we took the money away from the police department, where would we be putting it exactly to fund education? City government has some responsibilities. Public safety is one of them, sanitation and some other things. That's what we spend our money on. We don't tax you to run schools. The school district taxes you at a much higher rate, in fact, to run schools. So none of it made any sense. So they wanted us to defund the police. I made it very clear that we would never defund the police as long as I was mayor. Well, some of my council felt the pressure, and they weren't as confident, I guess, in that position. So they started to sort of find ways to defund the police that didn't sound like defunding the police, like cutting the police overtime budget by 25% in the middle of a violent crime wave. Now, the reason why we have a police overtime budget is because our police department has actually shrunk over the past 15 years, because we had a pension issue, several years ago that caused the police department to really lose a lot of officers to early retirement. They said they took their money and ran because we were having pension issues. And so the idea that we would cut the police overtime budget was the same thing essentially as saying, take an already understaffed department that's not covering the city right now and cut the funding for having them work longer shifts. It was a horrible situation. I rejected all of it, and the result was I got the protesters at my house who stated as their goal to intimidate my wife was pregnant with my now 1-year-old daughter at the time. My oldest son was 5. My other son was 2. And the protester said that our goal is to make his kids as uncomfortable as possible and make his family as frightened as possible. And I guess in an effort to change my position on the policy, because I was concerned for my kids' safety. And so that was a low point in the mayoralty. But I held the line. And what's amazing to me is just how we've kind of seen the activist community has gone real quiet. And now you see politicians on the other side of the aisle, from the folks who were sort of, saying this is nonsense, also saying this was nonsense. So thank God it took longer than it should have, but thank God everyone at least now is talking about, supporting public safety. And I believe that you do what you need to do in your community to achieve public safety, so it'll be a different solution everywhere. But in Dallas, it's meant actually paying our officers a competitive wage. So we were losing all of our officers to, surprise, the suburbs, where, guess what? You get paid more money to do what? Fight less crime. I mean, that sounds like a good deal, right, to a lot of people. So we've had to do those things, and we have. And Dallas was the only city in the top 10 last year whose violent crime fell. Violent crime in every other major city in the United States, top 10 went up last year, but it went down in Dallas. So that was good.
Yes.
Well, thank you. We'll see about this year, though. It's a rough year so far.
One of the issues that was discussed on the last mayor's panel that is, at least by public opinion surveys here in California, is a top 5 issue, is homelessness. We have a question here about that particular issue. And in Dallas, what does homelessness look like there? Have you seen an increase? What are you doing to respond to it?
We saw an increase. We're seeing a slight decrease right now, but we've been struggling with homelessness too. I'm not just saying this because I'm in a room full of Californians. I actually believe this. Homelessness is a very tough issue because of the cards you have to play when it comes to addressing the root causes of what has people on the streets. Sadly, I think politics has made this a harder conversation than it needs to be. But I don't think that and I think in Dallas, hopefully we're going to start going more in this direction. But I feel bad in a lot of ways for my brothers and sisters in California, because I do believe you do have a couple things working against you. One is you are in paradise. You're in paradise. And I do know that a certain percent of your homeless in California are not native to California. People are coming to California in some ways, it's a magnet for some of these issues. So, you have warm weather, and you have a government probably that's more in some ways more warm-hearted, I guess, towards the issue than some places maybe. And so that combination makes it challenging for you guys out here. We have some of the same issues. We're in a pretty, climate-wise, it's pretty good.
Yep.
But I think that there's a mental health aspect to homelessness, a drug addiction aspect to homelessness, some stuff going on in people's homes that have given them no other option but to be on the streets because they've exhausted every other option they have in terms of where to stay, that don't get nearly enough discussion, and we talk about it exclusively as a housing issue. Mm-hmm. There's a housing aspect to homelessness for sure. By definition, if you're homeless, you're without a home. But to pretend, and I do think it's pretending, to pretend as though the biggest problem that every person has on the streets of Los Angeles or Dallas or any place else for that matter is that they don't have a home, is to not really understand why people are on the streets. There's mental illness and there's drug addiction that has to be dealt with. And so I'm trying to get our county, again, who has all the money and the resources to do health issues and has a sheriff's department that can be out there to provide the sort of public safety support. We need mental health people, drug people, people who do this at the county level anyway, the drug treatment folks, being paired with someone from the sheriff's department to provide protection. And they need to be going into these encampments and basically doing everything that the law will allow you to do short of involuntary treatment, replacement, and get these folks the help they really need, because they're not just one apartment away from having their problem solved. It's not something that a developer is going to build our way out of. I'm sorry. I know that's not good liberal orthodoxy, but
Hello, California.
It's the truth.
Yep.
We've got to take the mental health and the drug addiction stuff seriously, and these folks aren't going to just wake up one day in an encampment and say, today's the day I'm going to go walk into Los Angeles County Health Department and get that help I've been needing. Yep. The Los Angeles County Health Department is going to have to go to them. Dallas County Health Department is going to have to go to them. And I'm not saying go, unprotected. Yep. We have a program called Right Care at the city level. When we respond to a mental health call, instead of just sitting an armed officer that's not really prepared to deal with a schizophrenic person on the other end, we send an officer to provide protection to an actual mental health counselor. And it has been tremendously successful in reducing the amount of people who end up in our jails or end up hurt, frankly, as opposed to end up getting the help they need, because we're sending the right folks. I'm saying we need to do the same thing with the homeless. The county needs to step up, send mental health and drug professionals along with the sheriff. I don't know what they're collecting all these taxes for in Dallas County to ride around in sheriff's cars and not do anything, because our police are the ones who are making all the arrests and doing all the work of fighting crime. Send these sheriffs along with these county folks who are up in a building somewhere to these underpasses and deal with this homelessness issue where it's happening. And that'll help solve it, I believe.
All right, so we're in our last 10 minutes. And now we're going to go, can we do a lightning round?
Rapid fire, lightning round.
We got a lot of great questions. So
sure, I'll go real fast.
Not yes, no, but we're going to see how many of these we can get through, because there's some great questions.
You did a great job with lightning round. I'm going to see if I can channel my Professor Glazer.
Is Dallas creating or already has created an economic development corporation, an EDC? How do you see this model making a difference? You mentioned the
We've authorized one, but we haven't actually appointed the members to it, and that needs to happen within the next couple of months. But that's the answer.
Great. Hey, this is working. What is your favorite part of being the mayor, and what is the least favorite part?
Actually talking to young people about my story and growing up in the city, and helping them understand that they don't actually have to be rich or powerful or anything like that. They can be a great success if they just take care of their every single day, just do what's put in front of them by their teachers, by their parents. Be a good kid, basically, which is every kid's capable of doing that. I've explained to them that you don't need this lifelong plan and know exactly where you're going to end up. just take care of what's in front of you today. Be a good brother to or sister to your siblings. Be a good son or daughter to your parents, and be a delight to teach. And people will just throw opportunities at you. That's what happened to me growing up. I was not the greatest anything, but I just tried hard. And people, I don't know if they felt sorry for me or what, but they just kept giving me opportunities. And I said, that's the way it'll play out for you. And so I love telling that story to kids because they seem to get it. Because I think they get told so often that they have to have it all figured out, and you need this plan, and you're a third grader. You know where you're going to college already. It's like, you just need to do your homework and do the best you can. That's it. So I like talking to kids.
And worst part?
City council meetings, probably, because and I say that because I actually, in Dallas, again, systems all are different. I have to preside over every second of the meeting, including the entire zoning agenda and every zoning variance everybody wants. I'm the presiding officer of the council, so I have to be there for the whole deal, and it's tough sometimes because council members, it doesn't really matter if I have 14 of them. It doesn't matter if 13 of them have already said everything. They all need to say the same thing, their own special way for their own constituents to hear on TV. So it can be a little bit repetitive.
We have a question here on the sense of place, and it's important in leadership. We touched on it before, but is it important for there to be a sense of a Dallas way of doing things? How do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I think every city, just like you said, Professor Gilley, every city, the fun cities are going to win. The cities that have an identity and a vision for themselves and in a way a mythology about themselves have a better story to tell, and people like stories. Dallas's mythology, its story, is we're the city that really has no reason to exist. All the other major cities in the country, or certainly in Texas, exist for some reason. They're on a navigable river, or there's a port, or something, or there's natural resources in the ground it was a mining town, there was something. Dallas had none of the above. Some guys from Tennessee came and put a trading post there and willed that city into being a business capital for Texas. And that's the only reason why it's important. It was literally made to be Texas's business capital. So we got zero oil reserves. Despite the fact that the TV show Dallas was about Dallas, there's no oil there. There's no oil there. And there's, like I said, the Trinity River, not navigable. It's a terrible river for that. It's just where we put our, effluent water to go down a stream. But we don't get water from it. We use reservoirs that the Corps of Engineers built for us. It's there because people wanted to create a banking, insurance, trading capital. And then someone had a vision to put an airport there that really honestly cracked things open for us. The DFW is just an incredible driver. So, it's been a great story.
A personal question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the role of faith in your experience as mayor of Dallas?
Oh, it's huge to me. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say I'm a Christian, and it's a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
And who I am is, I bring it to work every day. Like, I don't I don't even try to separate the two. Like, I'm a very sort of, even when my council has fought with me, even when we've not agreed on a policy, what to a person they will tell you is, he's not going to double cross you. He's not going to tell you today it's this and then tomorrow's that. Like, in a lot of ways, I make it real easy for them to scheme and plan, because they know if I told them this on Monday, it's going to be the same thing on Friday. Or if I change my mind, I'm going to tell them I'm changing my mind. But I don't do the deception thing. I don't do the you see me coming from a mile away. I told them what I was going to do on the defund the police stuff. I even told them down to the point of saying, I'm going to, remember, this was back when the real momentum was on the defund side, not on Democrats who were opposed to it. Like, I was the crazy one. Yeah. I told them, I don't care. I'm going to take this position, and I'm going to literally message your constituents, people in your district, every single day until you relent. I'm going to make them turn on you because you're wrong on this. I'm just telling you ahead of time, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to do it. And I followed through almost daily, just giving them the facts. I told their constituents, these are the murder numbers in your district this month. These are the aggravated assault numbers in your district this month. Your council person voted to cut the police overtime budget by 25%. They voted against squad cars. They voted against markup of the police salaries. They voted against all of these things. But these are your numbers. You do what you have to do with your council member now. So I tell it like it is, and that is a product of being raised by folks, and my mom in particular, grandparents too, who just said, you gotta be willing sometimes to stand all by yourself if you believe you're right. If you believe something is true, you gotta be willing sometimes to be all by yourself. You can't constantly need the company of others to take a position. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone, and that's what it's been for me as mayor sometimes, is being by myself, but not too often.
Well, obviously not. Really one of the great local leaders, big city leaders that we have in the country. Please join me in thanking Mayor Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, man.
I love you, Pete.
Love you too.